The white flag appeared just after sunrise. It moved slowly above the frozen field, rising and falling with the cold December wind. American riflemen stopped firing. Machine guns fell silent one after another. The smoke hanging over the battlefield began to drift away. For a brief moment, it looked as if the fighting was finally over. Men who had survived hours of artillery fire loosened their grip on their rifles.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
A few even stepped out from behind shattered stone walls to get a better look. After days of constant combat, surrender seemed like the only ending anyone expected. But several hundred yards behind the front line, one American commander was not convinced. General George S. Patton stared through his binoculars, studying the distant figures. Something was wrong. He could not explain it in a single sentence, but years of war had taught him one lesson. On a battlefield, what looks safest is sometimes the most dangerous thing you will ever see. December 1944 was one of the coldest periods of the Second World War in Western Europe. Snow covered forests, roads, and villages across Belgium and Luxembourg. Temperatures dropped below freezing every night. Engines struggled to start, weapons jammed from ice. Soldiers wrapped blankets around their shoulders whenever they found a few quiet minutes. Yet despite the bitter weather, neither side had any intention of stopping. Adolf Hitler had launched one final major offensive through the Ardennes. The operation, known today as the Battle of the Bulge, aimed to split the Allied armies, capture the port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies into negotiations. It was a desperate gamble, and it depended on surprise. The German attack began before dawn on 16 December 1944. Thick fog covered the hills. Heavy artillery smashed American positions across an 80-mile front. Soon after, German infantry and armored divisions pushed forward through forests that many believed were too difficult for a major attack. American units were caught by surprise. Roads filled with retreating vehicles, wounded men, and confused military police trying to direct traffic. Telephone lines were cut. Radio messages became difficult to understand. In many places, junior officers had to make life or death decisions without hearing from higher headquarters for hours. Farther south, Lieutenant General George S. Patton commanded the United States Third Army. Unlike many commanders, Patton believed the German army was still capable of launching a powerful attack. Weeks before the offensive began, he had ordered his staff to prepare emergency plans for turning his army north if needed. Many officers considered the idea unlikely. German forces had suffered heavy losses during the summer and autumn campaigns across France. Fuel shortages limited their movement. Allied aircraft dominated the skies whenever the weather allowed. Even so, Patton refused to believe that a cornered enemy was a harmless enemy. His headquarters moved with remarkable speed. Maps covered every available table. Staff officers worked through the night calculating routes, bridge capacities, fuel requirements, and supply schedules. Patton demanded answers immediately, not tomorrow morning. He believed hesitation killed more soldiers than bold decisions. While many commanders were still trying to understand the scale of the German offensive, the Third Army was already preparing to move north toward the fighting. By 22 December, elements of the Third Army were pushing through icy roads toward the Bastogne sector. The famous crossroads town had become one of the most important locations on the Western Front. American defenders, including the 101st Airborne Division and supporting units, were surrounded but continued to resist. German commanders expected the town to fall quickly. Instead, every hour of resistance disrupted their timetable. The closer Patton's forces came to the front, the stranger the battlefield became. American patrols reported abandoned trucks with engines still warm. Fresh tank tracks disappeared into forests without obvious destinations. Prisoners gave conflicting stories during interrogation. Some insisted their units were retreating. Others claimed fresh reinforcements were arriving. Intelligence officers struggled to separate truth from deliberate misinformation. War rarely offered perfect information. Every report had to be questioned. German commanders understood something many people forget today. Deception could be just as valuable as firepower. False radio traffic, fake movements, captured uniforms, misleading road signs, and carefully planned distractions had all been used throughout the war. During the Ardennes offensive, German special operations under Lieutenant Colonel Otto Skorzeny even sent English-speaking soldiers behind Allied lines wearing captured American uniforms. Their mission was to spread confusion, redirect traffic, destroy communications, and create panic. Although many of these missions achieved limited military success, they forced American troops to question almost everything they saw. Checkpoint guards began asking unusual questions to identify possible infiltrators. Drivers were stopped and questioned about baseball, American state capitals, and movie stars. Soldiers laughed about it later, but at the time nobody knew who could be trusted. Fear spread faster than facts. Patton paid close attention to these reports. He believed deception usually followed a pattern. If the enemy wanted you to believe something strongly enough, there was probably another objective hidden nearby. Every unusual event deserved another look. Late in December, one of the Third Army's forward elements approached a small Belgian village that had changed hands more than once during the offensive. The houses were damaged. Windows had been shattered by artillery blasts. Roofs sagged under heavy snow. Smoke drifted from burning barns on the edge of town. The road leading into the village passed through open farmland before reaching a narrow line of trees. It looked quiet, almost too quiet. American scouts advanced cautiously. Engineers checked the road for mines. Infantry spread out along frozen ditches while tank destroyers watched nearby hills through their gun sights. Nothing moved except the wind. Then someone spotted white cloth waving above a stone wall near the first farmhouse. The firing stopped almost immediately. Several German soldiers slowly appeared from behind cover. One held the white cloth high with both hands. Others walked carefully behind him with their rifles lowered. Their movements seemed tired. Their uniforms were dirty and covered with snow. From a distance, they looked exactly like exhausted men who had decided the war was over for them. American soldiers had seen scenes like this many times before. Throughout the campaign across France and Belgium, thousands of German troops had surrendered as Allied pressure increased. Many were young replacements. Others were older reservists. Some had gone days without proper food. Nobody was surprised to see another surrender. Word quickly traveled up the chain of command. German soldiers are coming out. They are waving a white flag. They want to surrender. For a few moments, relief spread across the American line. Every peaceful surrender meant fewer casualties. Every prisoner taken alive meant one less enemy firing a rifle tomorrow. But Patton never judged a situation by its first appearance. When the report reached higher headquarters, he began asking questions that sounded almost unreasonable. How many men were visible? Where were their officers? Why were they emerging from only one side of the village? Had every nearby building been observed? Were machine gun positions confirmed empty? No one immediately had complete answers. Patton requested updated reconnaissance instead of rushing forward. Some officers believed the Germans were simply surrendering after losing hope. Others argued the Americans should move quickly before additional enemy units escaped. Both ideas sounded reasonable. Yet Patton remained cautious. He had spent decades studying military history. He knew armies under pressure sometimes used surrender, ceasefire requests, or negotiations to gain time, reorganize positions, or draw opponents into exposed ground. Most surrenders were genuine. A few were deadly. His binoculars moved slowly across the village. He ignored the men holding the white cloth. Instead, he watched the buildings behind them. Nothing. Then he noticed something almost invisible. Snow fell from the roof of a damaged barn. Not naturally. It slid down in one narrow strip, almost as if someone inside had shifted position. A few seconds later, another detail appeared. A broken upstairs window reflected sunlight for only an instant. Glass does not move by itself. Someone had changed position behind it. Patton lowered the binoculars. His expression did not change. Experience had taught him that the battlefield often whispered before it shouted. He ordered forward observers to continue watching without advancing the main force. Artillery batteries quietly received updated firing coordinates. Tank crews remained inside their vehicles. Infantry stayed behind cover despite seeing what looked like surrendering enemy troops. Some younger soldiers wondered why they were waiting. The Germans were standing in the open. Why not simply collect the prisoners? Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The white flag continued moving gently in the freezing wind. The German group waited. The silence became uncomfortable. Then another report reached the command post. A reconnaissance patrol on the American right flank had found fresh tracks leading into the woods beside the village. Not away from it. Into it. The tracks belonged to armored vehicles. That changed everything. Patton knew damaged tanks could not disappear into forests without support. If armor had entered recently, where was it now? No engines could be heard. No movement was visible. Either the tanks had already withdrawn, or they were waiting. He believed the second possibility was far more dangerous. Instead of accepting the surrender immediately, Patton expanded reconnaissance on both flanks. Small patrols moved carefully through tree lines while remaining hidden from the village. Forward artillery observers adjusted their maps again. Radio operators spoke quietly to avoid unnecessary confusion. The battlefield still looked peaceful. But beneath that peaceful surface, tension was growing with every passing minute. The Americans were no longer watching only the men carrying the white flag. They were watching the silence behind them. And sometimes silence reveals more than gunfire ever can. The waiting felt endless. Every passing minute tested the nerves of the men lying in the frozen ditches. The Germans were still standing in the open with the white flag raised high. They made no attempt to advance and no attempt to retreat. It was an unusual kind of silence. The battlefield had gone from violent chaos to complete stillness, and that change alone made experienced officers uneasy. Many young soldiers believed the danger had passed. Veterans knew that the quietest moments often came just before the worst ones. Patton continued studying the ground instead of the men. He believed terrain often revealed the truth long before prisoners did. The narrow road leading into the village passed between two low ridges before reaching the first buildings. If American vehicles entered without first securing those ridges, they would be trapped in a deadly channel. Snow covered the slopes, but scattered bushes and broken stone walls offered enough concealment for machine guns, anti-tank weapons, or riflemen. It was exactly the kind of ground an experienced commander would choose for an ambush. Another reconnaissance report arrived. A patrol moving through the woods on the eastern side of the village had discovered fresh camouflage cut from nearby pine trees. The branches had been placed over deep tracks in the snow. Someone had tried to hide recent vehicle movement. The patrol also found empty ammunition crates that had not been there the day before. None of this proved a trap by itself, but together the signs pointed in one direction. German troops were still preparing to fight. Patton did not need absolute proof. Waiting for perfect information had cost armies throughout history. Instead, he trusted the pattern forming in front of him. Every small clue supported the next one. The unusual surrender, the hidden movement inside damaged buildings, the fresh armored tracks, the concealed positions. It was no longer one suspicious detail. It was a complete picture. He ordered the leading infantry companies to remain under cover. Tank destroyers shifted to positions where they could cover the road without exposing themselves. Engineers were told to stay back until the village had been thoroughly observed. Forward artillery batteries received one final adjustment to their firing data. The Americans looked almost motionless, but behind that calm appearance, every weapon was quietly being prepared. Across the village, the German soldiers holding the white flag continued waiting. Their plan depended on one simple expectation. They believed the Americans would step into the open to collect prisoners. Once enough men gathered on the road, hidden machine guns and anti-tank weapons would open fire from prepared positions. Even a short burst of surprise could cause confusion. In winter combat, confusion often spread faster than bullets. Whether this exact plan existed in this village or another like it during the Ardennes campaign, the principle was very real. Both Allied and German units had learned that deception could create opportunities where direct attacks failed. Every commander understood that battlefield tricks could save lives on one side while costing many on the other. Minutes stretched on. Then, the first mistake came from the hidden German positions. A nervous soldier shifted a heavy machine gun inside the upper floor of a damaged house. The barrel touched loose bricks that fell against the frozen wall below. The sound was small, almost impossible to hear at a distance, but one American observer watching through field glasses saw the movement clearly. He reported it immediately. A second observer noticed something else. A faint cloud of exhaust drifted upward behind a barn before disappearing into the cold air. Hidden engines were running. That was enough. Patton gave the order. Instead of advancing under the white flag, American artillery struck the edges of the village first. The opening rounds landed with frightening accuracy. Shells burst along tree lines, behind barns, and near suspected defensive positions. Snow exploded into the air with dirt, timber, and broken stone. Within seconds, the peaceful scene disappeared beneath smoke and flying debris. The white flag vanished. Machine guns opened fire from windows that had appeared empty only moments before. Tracer rounds crossed the road where American soldiers would have been walking if they had accepted the surrender at face value. Anti-tank guns fired from concealed positions toward places where American vehicles were expected to enter. The trap had sprung, but there was nobody standing where the Germans expected. American infantry stayed under cover exactly as Patton had ordered. Tank destroyers answered the enemy fire almost immediately. High-explosive rounds smashed into buildings that concealed German weapons. Rifle squads began working around both flanks, while artillery continued striking deeper into the village. The Germans had lost their greatest advantage. Surprise, without surprise, their prepared positions became targets. As American forces tightened the attack from multiple directions, several concealed German positions were destroyed before they could fully organize. Others attempted to withdraw through the woods, only to encounter American patrols that had already moved into blocking positions. The battle that followed was fierce, but it was fought on terms far more favorable to the Americans than the Germans had planned. When the firing finally began to fade, engineers entered the village behind the infantry. They found damaged weapons, abandoned ammunition, hastily prepared firing positions, and evidence that the defenders had expected American troops to approach much closer before opening fire. Whether every hidden position had been part of one carefully organized deception or simply a desperate defensive plan, the result was the same. Caution had prevented unnecessary losses. For many of the younger soldiers, the lesson stayed with them long after the war ended. Before that day, a white flag had seemed like the universal symbol of surrender. Afterward, they understood that symbols alone could never replace observation. A battlefield demanded constant judgment. Every movement had to be questioned. Every quiet moment deserved respect. Patton often spoke about speed, aggression, and relentless attack. But those who served under him also learned another side of his command style. He expected officers to think before acting. Fast decisions did not mean careless decisions. They meant recognizing danger before it became obvious to everyone else. That ability had not appeared overnight. George S. Patton had spent decades studying military history, leading soldiers in training, commanding armored formations across North Africa, Sicily, and France, and learning from both victories and mistakes. Experience had sharpened his instincts until small details that others ignored immediately caught his attention. The winter fighting in the Ardennes eventually turned against Germany. Patton's Third Army successfully attacked north to relieve the defenders at Bastogne, one of the most important achievements of the campaign. The German offensive gradually lost momentum as fuel shortages determined Allied resistance, and improving weather allowed Allied air power to return. By January 1945, Hitler's final gamble in the West had failed. Thousands of stories emerged from those freezing weeks. Some were stories of heroism, others were stories of sacrifice. Many were stories of ordinary soldiers making impossible decisions under unbearable pressure. They all shared one truth. Survival often depended on noticing the smallest detail before it was too late. Imagine standing on that frozen road. The gunfire has stopped. A white flag moves gently in the wind. Every part of you wants to believe the danger is over. Your hands are numb from the cold. Your body is exhausted. You have watched friends fall over the past several days. Peace is only a few hundred yards away, or at least it appears to be. Then one experienced commander looks through his binoculars and decides that something does not fit. He delays the advance by only a few minutes. Those few minutes change everything. That is one of the hardest lessons of war. Victory is not always won by the largest army or the most powerful weapon. Sometimes it belongs to the commander who refuses to let hope replace judgment. On a battlefield, appearances can be manufactured. Silence can hide danger. Relief can become the first step toward disaster. The white flag promised safety. General George S. Patton looked beyond the flag and searched for the truth. Whether the threat came from hidden machine guns, concealed armor, or an enemy waiting for one careless mistake, his refusal to trust appearances protected the men under his command. In war, instinct alone is never enough. But instinct built upon years of discipline, observation, and experience can mean the difference between walking into an ambush and walking away from one. Long after the smoke cleared and the snow covered the scars of battle once again, the lesson remained. Never judge a battlefield by its quietest moment. Sometimes the greatest victory begins with the courage to doubt what everyone else is ready to believe. This concludes the script in the false victory formula structure, with the understanding that the central ambush scenario is a historically grounded dramatization rather than a documented incident involving Patton exactly as described by the title.